Welcome to this episode of Off the Rack. I'm Walt Rakowich, and I'm grateful to have you here as we explore what it means to practice transformative leadership. I'm even more grateful to welcome today's transformative leader, Elliot Kotek. Elliot is an Emmy-winning, Cannes-recognized Australian producer. He's also a filmmaker, poet, photographer, and nonprofit founder, and he's editor-in-chief. He's the founder and CEO of the Nation of Artists, the founder of Beyond Cinema, and the co-founder of Not Impossible. As a former M&A lawyer, if you can believe that, specializing in biotech, Kotek holds a law degree and a BS in pharmacology and toxicology from Monash University. After moving to the US in the year 2000, he studied at the Lee Strasberg Theater Institute, and he completed UCLA's professional program in screenwriting. Kotek is passionate about the power of content and campaigns to create meaningful change, and takes pride in projects that deliver real impact. As the producer of groundbreaking work, he's created documentaries and virtual reality content for major brands, including Qualcomm, Intel, HP, Sony, Lego Education, and Participant Media with global distribution. His work has earned 7 Emmy nominations, 5 South by Southwest Innovation Awards, 5 Cannes Lions, 50-plus Tellys, and numerous other accolades, including a Gold Stevie Award and the Kellogg School of Management's Innovative Fellowship. As a leading voice in purposeful content, technology for good, and storytelling for social impact, Elliot has spoken at TEDMed, the United Nations, the U.S. Institute of Peace, and other prominent forums. His strategic 4P philosophy emphasizes passion, purpose, people, and possibility as keys to creating change. So Elliot captured my attention when he directed The Hidden Power of Purpose, a 5-time Emmy Award winner that tells the inspiring stories of 4 individuals aged 50 and older who have found purpose by dedicating themselves to improving their communities and, in the process, benefiting their own health as well. Join me for a conversation with this true Renaissance thinker. He's curious, he's creative, and he's purpose-driven. I hope you'll enjoy exploring versatility and impact with Elliot Kotek. Hey, welcome, Elliot. I'm thrilled to have you on the show today. I really am.
Well, I'm happy to kickstart this new year with you, talking about all the things that I love, and from looking through some of the pages of your book, it seems we've got a lot in common.
Well, I think we certainly do. Let's kick it off, Elliot. You're Australian. Okay. You grew up in Melbourne. Did I say that right, by the way? Melbourne?
It was music to my ears.
So 10 years ago, I was in Melbourne for Australia Day on January 26th. I remember the day. My wife and I went to the women's and men's finals of the Australian Open. And I got to tell you, man, it was one of the most spectacular times. It's like being in the U.S. for July 4th, except even better. And we spent most of our time in the Royal Botanic Gardens, and then we went over to the courts. And I know you just got back from Australia, I think. So yeah. I wonder, what was it like growing up there?
Oh man, it was first of all, I'd just like to say where I stay with the friends in Melbourne. We tend to stay in the same house every year that is near to my mum, but just around the corner. And one of the kids from that house where we stay was a ball kid at the Australian Open for many years.
No way.
My dad worked at Ford Motor Company for, got the gold watch like that long. And right. And it used to be the Ford Australian Open. So we used to get to go every year. We'd have court passes or back court passes. and you could just walk around, and it was such a celebration. There were people there from all over the world singing different anthems and songs. It's the summer. It's just
Yeah.
a gorgeous atmosphere, and it really was like an inclusive international atmosphere, and it really did feel like a really wonderful place to be. So I feel you. It wasn't even just for tennis fans. It was just for people looking to have a good time with other people from around the world. And it was just fantastic. And so I have some really fond memories of the tennis center and Rod Laver Arena, and obviously tennis, massive sport in Australia. And the Botanical Gardens, I had lunch there last week.
Oh
So
man.
yeah, with my cousins by the pond at the new cafe that they just opened. So I'm right there with you. Growing up there was, I mean, I didn't know any different. It's only now that I have kids here in the US that I kind of long for some of those days and those times when we were just riding our bikes around. And I grew up near the beach and had a grandfather who was one of those guys who would take a dip in the ocean every morning. And so I'd stand around with him and his mates on the hot sand throughout the summer. And yeah, growing up by the beach, I mean, no complaints, no complaints.
Man, it's a beautiful place. I mean, when we were walking around, everybody had a smile on their face. It was nice and sunny. It probably was at least 80 degrees. It was just beautiful.
I'll have to send you a couple of little goodies because I did bring back quite a few treats. So if anyone hasn't had them yet, look out for Tim Tams and caramello koalas. I'm not going to send you any meat pies just yet.
Thanks. All right. So I just referred to you as a Renaissance person in your introduction. Look, your life is a testament to versatility and purpose. Um, first of all, how did you transition from an M&A lawyer to an Emmy-winning filmmaker and then nonprofit leader? I mean, how do you go from that to that?
I think a lot of times it's just, or for me, it was really just a series of yeses of things that I thought were cool. I was always that, like, even when I graduated high school, I didn't really know what I wanted to be. And so I kept doors open all the time and kept doing more things.
Hmm.
And so I studied a range of different things and then ended up at theater school in New York, and so I was working as a lawyer in New York to get a visa to be there at the same time as I was going to the Lee Strasberg Theatre Institute full time. So I was kind of having these two full-time lives and sleeping very, very little. And it only just caught up with me in the last few years. but until then, I was pretty good at sleeping very, just a couple of hours a night. And I was just an incessant writer. And I think the writing is the fundamental element of it all that underlay everything. Like I always wanted to write something, whether it was something short, something pithy, something more like a play or a screenplay or whatever. But I always had this discipline of writing, and it wasn't because I had to. It was just I felt a need to. I think a lot of people want to write, but some people feel compelled to as a muscle, and I always did. And so moving to New York for me was really about taking some time to myself to be that writer in the village in that stereotypical way that you see on TV growing up. And it was just meant to be a 2-year endeavor that's turned into a career. So I've been fortunate in that regard. But 9/11, I know in your book you talk about the impact of 9/11 on you as you kind of checked in and got on board a flight and then had to turn back around and go back to the gate.
Yep.
But similarly for me, I was at theatre school and working as an attorney in New York. And after 9/11 happened, the firm I was at gave us the option to be paid through the end of the year. And if work didn't come back into New York City at that time, you could sail off into the sunset. But during that time, I wrote a whole bunch of screenplays. I realigned myself around that purpose that I felt at the time, or the passion that I felt at the time, which was the writing, and really committed myself to it. And I think it forced a lot of people at that time in New York, especially, it felt, to realign themselves with what they really wanted to be doing, what really gave them joy.
Yeah, it's very interesting that you'd say that, so you've done I mean, you've done a lot of documentaries, and they address kind of all these different social issues, Black Boys, Queen Mimi. How do you decide what stories to talk about or to tell?
Yeah, I mean, some things find you and some things you pursue. And so for me, like a lot of the things that we did early on were things that done as a collective. It was like, what stories do we want to tell? What tools do we want to use? Let's gather everybody together and do them, whether they're commercially reasonable or not,
Hmm.
as an exercise. And we built up kind of cachet with that work. And that's early stuff like the first ever social, the first ever user generated film, which was called 140. It wasn't the most excellent film, but it was a really cool practice in using social media to bring people together to create something. And that, and another piece I did with some friends, Scott and Frank, for Nelson Mandela's birthday, like that got a lot of traction as well. And so what we were doing was just kind of opportunistic and thinking about what we cared about, what drove us, and then bringing people together to do it. Later on, it becomes more of an enterprise once it becomes work, right? And so
Hmm.
it's a mixture of what you feel compelled to do and what you're getting paid to do. It's like there's that Venn diagram. You've probably seen it. Some people call it the Ikigai diagram, but really it's a purpose diagram. And it's like what you love to do, what the world needs, and what you can get paid to do.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of times what gets accelerated is what you raise the money for. So as soon as you raise the money to do something, then you can go after the races. But
Right.
the projects you just mentioned, Queen Mimi, we just did that as a community. A friend of mine from Strasbourg, who I've known for 20 years, he was working across the road from Mimi, started filming her with his iPhone, and then came to me to help make it more formal. And then I brought in camera people, editors, and we started working on it as a proper project. Similarly with Black Boys, it was a project that had started after 2016, after Ferguson and different
Hmm.
incidences
Yeah.
that meant that there needed to be some sort of action and some sort of understanding for why the world, or at least the American world, was set up to not favor young black men at that time.
Hmm.
And then that led to this project. And so I joined a couple of years after that and saw it through to 2020, where it became urgent and then an emergency that this film get made.
Hmm.
And so everything kind of happens for its own reason. And usually, like those sorts of feature documentaries are done because you want to get them done, not because there's a financial reason to get them done.
Yeah. But if you have to raise money to do it, then presumably somebody in the outside world better like what you're trying to do.
Totally, and that's where we've tried to be just a bit more savvy over the last few years. I mean, branded content, of course, has become a massive thing for the last 10 years.
Yep.
Brands want to get behind things that have a message that reflects their own purpose,
Yep.
and so by marrying the projects that we're doing with brands who have an interest in those worlds, we're able to pursue more projects more
Yeah.
effectively.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So you speak a lot about the 4P strategy, your 4P strategy:
Yeah.
passion, purpose, people, and possible,
Yeah.
or possibility, I suppose. Uh, can you give us a little color to that meaning of your 4Ps, and maybe even if maybe share a pivotal moment when those principles kind of came to you in life?
Yeah, I was working on these projects. I had a business partner at the time, and we had a project called Not Impossible, and
Mm.
I was doing it on the side, and we our first project that we did together was we sent a team of people to Sudan with 3D printers to print a prosthetic limb for a boy who'd had both his arms blown off in the Nuba Mountains. And we were bringing people together we called it crowd solving. Like there was a lot of crowdfunding going on at the time. So we're like, oh, let's crowd solve this. And we were bringing people together with different skill sets to come up with the solutions to different things, and then bringing brands in to support those documentaries.
Okay.
And it was a pivotal time. It was really the beginning of this kind of branded content wave. And so we were basically doing short documentaries that then a brand got a thank you for at the end of the project. And I was really thinking a lot about this concept and relating it back to how I got to where I got to. I was working as a lawyer, but I was writing for a bunch of magazines. I wanted to interview and have my own kind of version of Inside the Actors Studio. So I was interviewing all these amazing creators. And I found that when you talk to passionate people and creative, it didn't even need to be creative people from the creative industries. It could be a hotelier who loved what they do, a restaurant owner who loves what they do, a podiatrist who loves what they do, right? It really didn't matter where they came from. If they showed a passion for what they were doing and what they were interested in, I could talk to them for hours, because that energy is absolutely contagious. I actually used to refer to it as like it felt like a love exchange. You'd spend this time that was completely unfiltered, uninterrupted, interviewing someone for a publication or a short interview or something. And because you had that intense, meaningful connection with them where you were just talking to them, they were just talking to you over the course of a couple of hours, you felt like some sort of joy, right? Like that could equate to felt like falling in love a little bit, right?
Yeah.
Like it's this uninterrupted time. And
Yeah.
and I just realized that passion is contagious, but
Yes.
it's only impactful when it transforms into something specific. So I call purpose in that context applied passion. So if you apply your passion towards a specific project, a specific thing, then it becomes purposeful, right? It's being directed. And so if you can say, as a result of my passion, I want to do this thing, and start talking about it, then people start identifying that purpose with you. They start thinking, oh, that's the guy who wants to do that thing. I talked about moving to New York for a good 18 months to 2 years before I did it. And it got to that point where people around town were like, are you still here? You better, like, how many goodbye parties can we have for you? Let's go. Right. Like, so I think like talking about it, like applying it to something and wanting to do it allows people around you to coalesce around that idea for you and associate you with it, to the point where your mum is saying, oh, I just met someone at the bowl, like my mum lawn bowls, right? So like at the lawn bowls club, who has a kid who's moving to the LA and wants to do this thing. Maybe you two should talk. Or are you posting it on any sort of network, whether it's a notice board, a community board, a social media platform, and then people coming to you and saying, I want to do that too, or I want to help you with that. And we're more connected than we've ever been. So it's easy enough to do and put that purpose out there. And so with that purpose being out there, you'll find that people come to you, right? And you'll find those people. So passion leads to purpose, which is that application of that passion, which leads to the people coalescing around you. And once you've got those people, it reaches a critical mass and a critical energy that is kind of unstoppable. And so with your people doing that purpose, anything is possible. And I saw it time and time again, and I've never seen a situation where it isn't applicable. I really think that it just always works. That if you're passionate about something and you let enough people know and you seek out those communities in some form, then those people will coalesce around you, and either you'll be able to help someone else with their project that gives you that feeling of participation, that feeling that you've contributed to something, or they're able to help you with yours, and it leads to possibility.
You
And
know, I wrote in my book Transfluence about this, about the importance that passion and purpose can play in our lives, and you need to have both. You really do, as you say. But
totally.
but you've taken it to the next level. You talk about surrounding yourself with people, and then therefore possibilities. And I couldn't agree with you more.
Yeah.
Um, and it is contagious when you're around somebody that has both passion and purpose. I mean, you just want to follow them and talk to them at all times,
Yeah.
right?
And that's what
Yeah,
I tell people all the time is like, it doesn't even matter. Like, if like people talk about finding your purpose and
yeah,
other people talk about finding your passion, and they're like, oh, I don't know what mine should be. And I'm like, it doesn't even need to be yours just yet. If you feel good helping someone else with something on some sort of project that you agree with or fundamentally you think serves some sort of higher end, or you're even just your local community or someone's family, like getting involved with someone else's purpose can be just equally fulfilling. So it's like while you're
absolutely.
waiting for yours to come along, help someone else help someone else out with theirs, you know?
Yeah. Well, I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about that in a moment, but I want to switch gears a little bit. I can't tell you how much I enjoyed your documentary, The Hidden Power of Purpose. I mean, it was riveting to me. I've always been a big believer in Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning, and the power that kind of meaning and purpose can bring to people throughout their lives. But you not only document personal stories, which there were, I think, four of them or so. Um, they're really testimonies to that power, but you also kind of talk a little bit more about scientific insights that sort of back that up, which I'm not surprised about. But a couple questions come to my mind, and the first is that you did this documentary with AARP. Um, the older I get, the more plugged in I'm getting to AARP. And I'm just curious, did they approach you, or did you approach them to do this documentary?
Yeah, it was the best situation in this way was that AARP have something called the Purpose Awards, where
Oh
they
yeah, right,
recognize a handful
right,
of people each year who have initiated a nonprofit or some sort of endeavor after the age of 45,
yeah.
and are having impact. And they give them the big checks at a big gala ceremony, and it's really it's a cool award. And it was the beginning of COVID, and they weren't able to have their gala event. And
Okay.
I had pitched them something else previously. I talked to them about a couple of other projects that I have. One about the world's fastest grandmother. This just this kick butt grandma who I love and still want to tell her story, but she's just this incredible woman. And I thought that was going to be a go with AARP, and it ended up not working out. But the people there remembered that project, and they're like, oh, well, we want to do this gala. We can't do it at the moment because of COVID. What if we use the funds that we'd normally put into the gala event and producing that to create a purpose documentary of sorts? And so the people from AARP who I'd been pitching on this other thing said, hey, we've got this other project we want to talk to you about. You only do things that are purposeful, so we have to ask you first. And I was similarly minded in that I can't let someone else do this project, right? Like if someone
Oh,
else
it's
made a
perfect for you.
project about purpose when
Yeah,
I've been pitching myself as the purpose documentary
right.
guy for a decade, it was like I wouldn't be able to look at myself in the mirror from that day forward. So I took on this project, and originally it was actually called The Science of Purpose, and the first cut was over 2 hours. And to your point, what we did was we interviewed all these scientists around the country and even around the world, who have
Sanjay
these.
Gupta was one of them, I think. Sanjay
Yes,
Gupta was one. Yeah,
yes.
yeah,
Sanjay Gupta, who a lot of people know from CNN as the medical
right.
specialist on CNN, but I didn't know he was still a practicing neurosurgeon at Grady Memorial Hospital in Atlanta. And so he
Wow.
gets to look at the human brain on a level that no one else gets to see. and is quite an incredible guy in terms of how he thinks about it. He's written on the subject. He has many books around longevity, around brain health, and just is a super interesting guy. And then you've got on the other end of the spectrum, someone like Deepak Chopra, who's also
Right.
in film, right? Who a lot of people dismissed in his early days because he was saying, oh, if you think positive thoughts, they're going to have this positive impact on your body. But because it wasn't really measurable, it was just seen as being this science adjacent kind of philosophy. But what's amazing about what's developed over the last 20 years is that we now have the technologies, whether it's our Apple Watches that measure our biometrics, our heart rates, our blood oxygen levels, etc., on a moment-to-moment basis. We are able to look at our brains using MRIs. And that's the thing, is we only used to use these technologies if someone was in trauma, if someone had had an accident, if someone was suffering from disease. And so a lot of the brains that were looked at were diseased brains or brains that had suffered some traumatic injury. But now, as they've become more accepted, more utilized, people are actually using them to look at healthy brains and what makes a healthy brain function even better. And so by speaking to people who work on the genomic level, people who work on the behavioral psychology level, all the way through to neurosurgeons, like you mentioned, like Sanjay, we got to ask them what they're actually seeing the value of purpose being. And it is incredible how all of them say that it's undeniable. It's not just supported by science, but it's consistently proven by science that living with purpose or having purpose, it reduces the amount of inflammation in our bodies, and it increases the amount of antibodies that are fighting off or warding off things that are trying to make us sick or unwell. Because our bodies and our brains want us to achieve the things that we're setting our minds to. And it goes back thousands of years to when we needed to fight off some sort of actual physical threat, like that was going to disrupt our families, ourselves, our lives. And you know it, and everybody knows it. It's like if you have, let's say, like a nagging injury, and it could be like something small, like your knees playing up a little or your shoulders a little sore. But if you're focused on a task, that thing goes away for the time that you're focused.
Yeah.
It's quite an unbelievable thing. And you feel like you're in a state of flow. You feel really engaged with something. And those sorts of niggles go away while you're concentrating on that task. It might come back later, but it's our body's way of saying, yeah, we can see this is really important to you. We're going to ward it off and keep it at bay while you're working towards this thing. So the more you can be working towards something and have this North Star, it doesn't need to be a goal that is reachable. You don't have to say, I want to run a marathon, but just some sort of North Star, like, oh, I want to spend more time with family. I want to spend more time in nature. I want to read more books, study more languages. I want to travel more. Whatever that is, that can be a driving force for you is going to be really significantly helpful for you, both on a brain level and a body level.
There's no question about it. I mean, I could not agree with you more. It's I was just sick for 2 months, and I found myself, and I had respiratory issues. I found myself so focused on my respiratory issues that it was actually, kind of bringing me down. And but the more I could divert that thinking to something different, the better days that it seems like I had. And I know it's just hard to explain, but I totally understand what you're saying.
Yeah, and the scientists I spoke to were people from, big Ivy League universities and
Yeah.
the Nourishing Institute at Harvard, who led me to this guy, Eric Kim, in Vancouver. Not even everybody made it into the final film. But like we met with a lot of people who use hard data. This was not some like perception or opinion. This was all data fed and data led, which was what made it more exciting. And there was someone, Michelle Carlson is her name. She's a doctor at the brain lab at Johns Hopkins University, and she said to me, a lot of times as a society, we focus on behaviors. like diet and exercise, right? Like, and we tell people, oh, here's the latest diet, here's the latest exercise. And people get focused on those things. But what we don't find enough time to do is to talk about what motivates us, what's a motivator for us. Because if you can have something that you're wanting to do, that you're motivated by, you're more likely to get up and move around. You're more likely to eat at intervals to fuel you as you go through your day, as opposed to being stagnant and so it was really quite a reflection for me as a process to have these conversations and think about, oh yeah, let's think about the motivators, not just the behaviors all the time.
So, one of the most profound takeaways from that documentary, to me at least, when you talk about purpose, is that purpose doesn't have to be this big life-altering thing. And like you said earlier, I mean, maybe we don't know exactly what our purpose is, but we can all find purpose in small daily actions. That was one takeaway. It's like, oh, that's interesting, because it kind of seems to me like if we can gain a sense of purpose in small and perhaps little things, then actually we can all do it. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, this is so important. It's really the case that a lot of times purpose was kind of the conversation around purpose was reserved for people who, no offense, had retired, had
sorry,
could afford, had the resources to think about their purpose, but it's not a case of just being applicable to people who have the time and or money to pursue it. And like you're saying, it doesn't have to be this overwhelming, massive thing that is just unidirectional. It's like, oh yeah, I'm going to go, I've done everything else. Now I'm going to go off and find my purpose. Right. And in fact, it can be more beneficial and more meaningful to people from underserved communities to get in touch with like what it is that's important to them because of those health benefits and psychological benefits. Dr. Anthony Burrow from Cornell University did these studies in Chicago where he asked someone about purpose, and then they got on the L train and he had people watching them on the L train as they made their way around Chicago. And people who he'd asked about their purpose were much more likely to sit with a mix of different people on the train than people who hadn't been asked anything. We tend to seek out comfort and security when we don't know a situation. But if we're focused on purpose and we have our own journey, we're much more likely to be secure in who we are and more inclusive of others. And it's just a good reminder that like anyone can benefit from this path of purpose. And this other guy, Todd Kashdan, who kind of came up with the clinical definition of purpose, he said he's kept a diary for 16 or so years. And what he does is really just write down each day the times when he's felt most engaged. And I encourage everybody to do this. Is like, you don't have to do it every day, but start identifying or acknowledging what you did today that made you feel engaged, or when time moved quickly, when you felt like you were on point, when you felt like you were interested in something. What are those moments in your day where you felt, oh my gosh, that was a nice moment? It does. So when you think about, like, a lot of people have this pursuit of happiness, it doesn't need to be things that made you happy. It just needs to be things that made you feel connected, that you were in some sort of conversation that felt good, you were doing some sort of activity that felt really good. And then try and increase the amount of times over your week or a month that you do those things, because that thing is resonating with you and making you feel good. You should try and do it more often. And as humans, we don't stop and reflect upon those moments that make us feel good. And so I think that that's a really big takeaway. And so even if it's like, oh, I did one push-up today, and I just thought that was hilarious and funny and made me feel good, maybe I'll do another one tomorrow. maybe I'll go for a little walk. Maybe I'll go and look at that tree that is on the corner that that I've always wanted to stop and look at, but I don't want to be thought of as weird for standing on a corner looking at a tree. I don't want people to think that I'm losing my marbles.
Right.
Just go and do it if it makes you feel good, or take a photo of it so that it makes you look like you've got an excuse for standing there looking at the tree. But just find those things that bring you that little bit of harmony and joy, and try and do them more often, whether it's seeing a grandkid or even like visiting a friend and their family, whatever it is, playing a game of backgammon, whatever it is. Try and recognize when those moments present themselves and try and do them a little more.
I interviewed somebody in my first season, so it's been 3 years now ago, Drew Dudley, who basically said that he he from time to time will go into a grocery store, and you know how they have the flowers. Sometimes they have flowers nearby. One time he took the flowers and gave it to the person who was checking him out, and she charged him for it, and then she tried to put it in a bag, and he said, no, they're for you. And she was just blown away by that, right? And so he bought her flowers, and she started crying. She said, no one's ever treated me like that way at the checkout. And I just thought about when he said that, and it kind of connected to what you just said, that sometimes it's just the little things.
And what I would love to know is that was something that he did,
right?
That he did to make her feel good. But I bet you $1,000,000 it made him feel just as good, if not better.
Yes,
right?
No question.
And there's a bunch of science around that too, that the act of doing something for someone else is exponentially greater than doing the same thing for yourself.
I couldn't agree with you more. So, Elliot, what do you hope that audiences will take away from all of your work and the work on purpose and influencing others? What do you hope to get out of this?
And for me, it comes down to that equation that you mentioned at the top of the show, which is like ideas plus empathy equals impact. And I know you have mixed feelings on empathy, so let's call it the pursuit of empathy. As
No, not mixed feelings. I don't.
No.
I think it can
whether
be
we're able to have true views on how we're able to have true empathy, right?
Yes.
And call it compassion, call it whatever. But it's like, but really, it's like. A lot of people think they have great ideas, right? And they bring them with them to their workplace, to their social settings, etc. And they try and impose that great idea on someone else, regardless of understanding the situation and what might really be needed in that situation. Might not be that great idea, or it might be a tweak of that great idea.
Right.
But if they're not listening to what's actually needed, it might be a great idea forced onto the wrong environment, right? And so we like to say it's only by having the great idea and then also having that ability to listen, empathize, connect, have compassion for someone else that leads to that impact. And conversely is true too. You can be as emotionally resonant a person. You could have the highest EQ and all these other kind of cool, true leadership values where you are truly leading a group. But if you stay stuck in that moment of listening, of being compassionate, of being empathetic, of being understanding, and don't put a bow on it at some point and say, hey, we need to wrap this up and move it towards something positive. Again, without adding an idea to the empathy, you also can't have impact. So because we have that equation at my company, like we are always looking at what's the impact. And so if someone comes to us and says, we want to make a documentary, we could be like, great, but what do you want to achieve? We're just as happy making a 6-second YouTube pre-roll, or maybe not just as happy, but we're equally as open to making something short that reaches its target audience and has an actual impact as we are making a documentary. And so for us, it really is about the impact. And so whether it's Black Boys and Black Girls, which are, incredible projects, or Queen Mimi, which has us reframe how we look at the homeless person we walk past every day, who might have this incredibly rich story and background that if we took a second to know it, we would be better off for it. Whether it's something like The Hidden Power of Purpose, where we just get to kind of reframe our own worlds a little bit and do something for ourselves that enables us to reflect and move forward with a bit more intention. Any of them coalesce around this idea that we can have a more impactful existence on ourselves and on others. And I think like that's really motivated by the system you grow up in, whether it's growing up in Australia or having grandparents you look up to, or a mentor or a teacher that you respect and you want to kind of bring something to their world. But I think that's really it, is just having a little bit more impact in the world around us, making it a little bit better than how we found it, and just playing our part to lift up others and get outside of our own heads sometimes.
Well, you're changing the world in what you do, which is admirable. You've said that you find your people when you share your purpose. I'm curious, who are some of the people who have been most influential in kind of helping you fulfill your purpose?
Oh man, it's a big question, Walt. I love this question. And when I started off as a journalist, I used to ask people who their mentors are or who they consider their mentors to be. And it was really a question that gave me a lot of joy, watching them think through the teachers and other charismatic figures that had shaped someone's world. But I think like my grandfathers were both really cool in completely different ways. And there's a part of me that's like, oh, what would Joe do? What would Sam do? Like they've definitely instilled something in me by living out who they were and living through the things that they lived through. And it gives me perspective and context. And then there are people in the current world like Carol Cohn is someone I collaborate with quite a bit. And she's called the godmother of course marketing. But she was one of these kind of first people who took marketing dollars and put them towards something good, big campaigns with Rockport, with Women Wear Red campaigns, things like that. She started the cause marketing division at Edelman PR Group. And she's always looking at the world with a very proactive sense of what can I do? How can I do it big? And how can I make an impact? And so I'd say like my grandparents and parents who had this sort of sense of civic responsibility, and then Carol in the current environment, who's a pocket rocket and inspires me to keep going and doing the work we do too.
Well, we are products of our parents. That's for sure. One way or the other.
Yeah, exactly. Sometimes
I was blessed to have two good ones. I think if someone asked me that question, I'd probably say my mom and dad too. That's for sure. Elliot, so I'm asking all my guests this year about purpose. I'm so glad. By the way, you're the first one kicking this whole season off, which is going to be focused on purpose. And the entire interview has just been a great primer for that topic. But I'm going to ask all my guests this year about this question. So you're the first one. Okay. What single purpose are you most passionate about pursuing?
Yeah, so after doing this film, I read a book by Vic Strecker, who's one of the characters, one of the subjects of the movie. He's at the University of Michigan, and his book called Life on Purpose. And it takes you through an exercise that helps you crystallize how you talk about your purpose, which I found really helpful. And for me, it was to continue to have outsized impact through creativity and community. So I love the creative arts. And if you can bring people together in a community to do something creative and have impact through that, that's what brings me a great amount of joy.
Wow. That's pretty powerful. And not that many people can say it in one line.
No, exactly. And I couldn't either. I mean, I could do my 4 Ps. You have your 3 Hs, which I love
three
as
H's.
well. Yeah.
You
Four
got to be able to
Ps, 3 Cs,
synthesize.
5 Cs. They're all great things to synthesize. But he
Right.
takes you through. I was like, yeah, when people ask me what I want to do or whatever, like what's that North Star, right? I can tell you what projects I want to do. I can talk about those all day, but I couldn't quite synthesize the whole thing. And by going through his exercise, he's like, here are 20 words, choose some that resonate and put them together in a sentence. And I was like, yeah, I want to continue to have impact. And I changed that to like outsized impact, like really big impact.
Yeah.
And, but by bringing together people in community and through some sort of creative process. And so it was easy enough for me to do once I kind of went through that journey. But yeah.
Elliot, that's powerful. I wrote it all down. I'm telling you, I'm sure I'm going to do a blog on that one for sure.
That's awesome.
Hey, listen, Elliot, I want to thank you so much for joining me on this episode of Off the Rack. I'm really grateful to you for being on, kicking the show off in the 4th season on purpose. And what can I say? Thank you. And by the way, you just got back from Australia. You get in and the next day you got to do this. So, I know your life's been kind of crazy over the holidays, but thank you so much for doing this. And I just want you to know how grateful I am to have you on the show.
Yeah, perfect way to start the year, Walt, and look forward to learning more and hearing more as you kind of kick off this senior year of your high school podcast.
That's a good way of putting it. I kind of feel like I'm in my senior year. But thank you, Elliot. And also, I'd like to thank all of you who tuned in on the show. You can always find more insights from our guests through Off the Rack Plus, which is our newsletter. We've got episodes, we've got highlights, transcripts, helpful takeaways, all that kind of stuff. And you can find it all on waltrakowicz.com. So thank you so much, everybody. And until the next time, I encourage all of you to be human with one another and find a way to have a positive influence on someone around you each and every day. Thanks, everybody.